This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Okay, so on this channel I'm interested in modelers and I'm interested in hopefully helping you to make a decision as a viewer about which kind of modeler might suit you. And the way that I try to do that is by showing you how it is that I actually use these devices and how I would build presets on them and certain things I can do with them. Now, it's a little bit difficult to compare these devices in some ways. So you see on this channel, sometimes I will try to do like an A/B or compare two devices with an actual amp. So the other day I did like a Helix Quad Cortex with a Lone Star, which I have behind me as well, and try and just show you, how close I can get both devices or how far away they both sound, and see whether there's an obvious kind of advantage to any one of these devices. I have to say that I think there's certain companies that don't mind me making videos with their devices, and I think there's also certain companies that would probably rather I didn't. And then there's certain companies who don't know I exist at all. So companies that I do have a little bit of a relationship with are Line 6 and Fractal. And I'm happy to keep making stuff for Neural DSP on the for their users, but I don't think the company really particularly wants me to do anything, at least from my correspondence with them. Anyway, but I'll keep doing it for you as a viewer. So let me know in the comments if you want me to continue making presets for the Quad Cortex, because the reason I was doing it in the first place was because I feel like the audience of people who have these devices are a little bit lacking in people making stuff for them. There are some people, but not like loads, partly because I think you can't sell presets on them. Anyway, so my thinking was that there are a few ways, like we could compare sound, and we can compare like Leo Gibson does, like actual performance of the units. I say I can't, but he can. So if you look on his channel, he's got like actual latency specifications and tests that he's done with pretty much every modeler. But the other thing I thought was, these are essentially like little computers, right? The part of these things that is expensive is not so much actually, I think, the hardware as it is the emulation. So the things that once people have actually spec'd the hardware and made it, it's also an expense to keep creating new algorithms, new amp models and all this stuff. And I thought, well, isn't that something that we should maybe factor into our decision making? So this doesn't take into consideration the amount of simultaneous things you can do, which of course the Quad Cortex, the Axe-Fx, FM9 and Helix would have advantages in. I think Quad Cortex would have the most advantages because you can run like at least four amp emulations in one. The Axe-Fx you can run 2 simultaneous. The Helix you could run 4. So that sort of thing I can't really factor in so easily. But I thought, well, let's look at kind of some of the competitors and see what they can do. So amp emulation wise, the one that stands out most of all is Fractal. And I think everyone would probably be aware of that, but I don't know if you'd be as aware of just how vast the difference is. So Fractal, for example, have nearly, I think, 300 amp models in there. By comparison, the Neural and Helix have like 80-ish. Hotone has 80-ish, and Boss, I think, have under 25. So, you know, in terms of cost per amp model, I think Fractal wins there. In terms of tweakability as well, within each of these parameters, Fractal wins. So when someone, you know, asks me, and they do, you know, which would you pick out of these things, I think these are the kind of things that I'd be looking at in terms of decision making. The other key area that I thought was valid and worth looking at would be the effects and the variety of effects in there. And similarly, actually the Hotone came up with a surprising number. I think there's about 400-ish in here. There's 400 in the Fractal world apparently. There's over 250 in the Helix world. There's over 120 odd in the, or 140 odd I think in the Boss. The Quad Cortex, predictably at the moment, is sort of lacking in that area. So you think that might be a way that you could factor in the cost of some of these things, and something that is not that obvious from demo videos and not that clear from, you know, when people talk about what these things can do. I think that's something worth bearing in mind, because there is a whole variety of sounds that you can make in the Fractal and Helix world that at present are not available in some of these other devices. And for instance, the Hotone Ampero really punches above its weight in this area too. So it's a little bit of an area which is, I think, worth delving into, and especially Fractal, for instance, as well. You can get really in detail and make really specific tweaks to things like delays and all this sort of stuff. Whereas at present, the Quad Cortex way of doing things is a little bit more on the limited side. Now, that's not to say that there's not enough in there to sink your teeth into, and I think you could get a gig out of it, but I think relatively there would be some sort of algorithm that you could do where you could kind of weigh up the cost of each specific thing in each device. And I think when you did that, the Fractal would come up cheapest, and maybe even the Hotone Ampero and Helix Stomp would be in there as well. For me personally, I think that's something that is a little bit more difficult to talk about, but I think is worth talking about if there's a way to talk about it. Lots of effects in here, and I was just enjoying trying to do that Chase Bliss thing. I'm going to try and do the same for the Quad Cortex at some point, and also the same for Fractal. I'm relatively agnostic on this stuff. Some of the companies like what I do, some of them don't so much, but it doesn't really make a difference to me, or hopefully you as a viewer. It's just about, you know, trying to be honest about what's going on inside these boxes. There is also the point that maybe folks might think that the effects in certain devices don't sound necessarily as good. There is one manufacturer who came out with a broken flanger early on. Let me know your thoughts. How do you make decisions on this sort of stuff? Do you compare kind of what's possible in each of the devices? If you go on the manufacturer pages, you tend to see kind of device lists. There's one for the Quad Cortex in the manual. Headrush as well has less than I expected for a company of its age. They were lowest on the amount of amp models and lowest on the amount of effects, which was interesting. So I think I'm going to try and get a Headrush device, because I've had some people asking me to do some stuff for them again, but leave comments below if you're one of the people wanting that. I think you can get great results out of all of them. That's why I'm happy to say that I'm pretty agnostic about this stuff. Yeah, feel free to like and subscribe.